reason you talk to experts first is that there's no lack of information. Like you can Google whatever you want. The problem is there's too much.
Mhm.
And so the filter becomes where the highest point of leverage is. And so experts have spent years filtering out for what's important. And so then you basically rapidly consume the most filtered information and then you reorganize the information. And so this is what a typical analyst will do as a consultant is like so for the space and cyber project that I did, we had 600 pages of notes from all the interviews that we did. First step is you recategorize all the news by category. So it goes from raw notes to categorized notes. Then from there, you distill and consolidate notes into what are the truths or the most distilled beliefs that we have about these particular, in this case, weapon systems, but
Mhm.
it could be whatever. And then from there, you're able to generate your inferences for what it looks like when it's right, what the problems are, what potential solutions might be, and then that's fundamentally how you say this is what we need to do next. That's if you're trying to learn something. But in talking to all those people, it actually works the same way because the interview process, the higher up the talent is, the more I would encourage entrepreneurs to use it as a learning process as a consultant. And so I present somebody who wants to come in for this role the actual problems of the business for which they would have control over and say, how would you solve these? And so then they tell me all the things that they would be considering and what they're thinking about. And then I'll ask the next guy what he thinks and what he thinks and what he thinks or she thinks. And then all of a sudden, one, I get free consulting, which is amazing. But secondly, you can tell by how the quality and quantity of metrics that someone tracks how good they are at a particular skill. And so this is fundamentally what separates beginners from experts. And so beginners typically have binary thinking in terms of outcomes. Either it worked or it didn't work. An expert, for example, for a marketing campaign, isn't going to say, oh, marketing doesn't work or ads don't work. They're going to say, this particular campaign didn't work because our click-through rate was too low, or because it was sending traffic that wasn't qualified and we weren't converting enough on the page, or we didn't have enough people who were taking the second step in our 4 steps. And like they can break down any part of that continuum. If I'm interviewing a salesperson and the person says, and I say, okay, how are you going to affect these metrics? What behaviors are you going to do? So to the same degree about vague versus specific, if they give me vague things back, I'm going to dial in and say, no, but what are you going to do that's going to change that? And by the way, this is a wonderful way to teach in the organization how what they do makes a business money. And so if you have like a customer support rep, for example, and you say, hey, how do you make our company money? If they can't explain it to you, they probably aren't doing it.
Yeah.
And it sounds as simple as it is, but if someone says, well, I answer customers' questions, and it's like, how does that make us money? Now, if they're able to say, when I answer customers' questions, I increase the likelihood that they refer us to other customers, and I increase the likelihood that they stay and continue to pay for us. So I help us get new customers by delivering an amazing experience, and I get the customers that we have to continue to pay us. And if it makes sense, I recommend other products and services that we have that I can introduce them to sales guys who can explain that so we can generate even more revenue from them. I'd be like, one, if you can articulate that, you're probably not just a frontline customer service rep,
Yeah.
you're probably a director, right? And so that level of nuance, the specificity is what shows expertise. And so when I look for and I'm interviewing for candidates, I want to gather as much information as I can. I want to drain as much knowledge as possible, but I'm also really looking for the quality and quantity of metrics they track and behaviors that they do to influence those metrics.
Mhm.
So in the hypothetical problem that let's say we're trying to solve, we have low click-through rates. I'd be like, okay, this is the problem we have. How would you approach changing it? Right. And then that actually gets me to understand what they would do in the organization. Because it's very easy to say, I'm going to come in and let's say a sales director, I'm going to come in and I'm going to improve the sales team. I'm like, okay, cool. What are you going to do? I'm going to coach the guys up. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And so just continuing to ask, what does that mean? How do you do that? Until they're like, okay, well, I'm going to meet with the guys every single morning and we're going to do role play. All right. Well, how do you role play? Well, we're going to start with the script and we're like, the more detailed they get, the more I believe they can do it because they've actually explained what actions they will take.
Mhm.
If someone can't dial it into actions, then it's very unlikely that they're going to take them. And so what I just outlined is basically 3 core things. So one is the quality and quantity of metrics that they track. The second is the behaviors that they're going to do to influence those metrics. And then laddering up to third, how do those metrics and these behaviors influence the revenue in the business? If they can explain that clearly, you have a winner.
All of that requires them to know if the person's not bullshitting.
Yeah, right.
And also to know like what metrics matter, right? Because someone could sit in an interview if I'm a first time founder, say a bunch of big complicated words. It
Sure.
sounds good. I hire them. And that's really what I'm trying to mitigate here is how do I not let a bullshitter pass me?
So assume I know nothing. Let's start there. What do you think customer service means? And so if someone really has expertise, so Richard Feynman was famous for this, for the physicist, which is if you can't explain it to a child, then you don't understand it well enough. And so if they do confuse you, then it means that they don't understand it or they're doing it purposefully, neither of which are good scenarios.
You said something during that explanation. You said you were talking about your founding partner at school, and you said that he was pursuing a CTO, and he said, if we can get this guy, he'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So many entrepreneurs that are starting in business have that thought sometimes. They think, if I could just get that guy from that amazing company to come join our garage where we're building this new startup, it would change our fortunes. But how? How do I get a truly exceptional person who is being paid shit tons of money, who has a comfortable job, who has security, to come join me in my bedroom?
Well, I think there's the soft and the hard side, right? So the hard side is compensation. Maybe you don't have as much cash, so it's like you're going to have a few levers at your disposal. So you have, what do you pay them in cash? What's their upside if there's equity or shares that you're going to give them? This is obviously if it's a software business. You can, and it's probably worth segmenting this. So if you're not in a software company, which is probably the vast majority of people listening to this, there are 4 elements within equity that exist. You have control, so who gets to call the shots? You have risk, what happens if everything goes wrong? Who's liable? You have profits, which is the cash flow of the business, who gets distributions? And then basically sale or enterprise value, when we sell or if we sell, who gets to participate in that upside? Those are kind of the 4 elements of equity. Now, the thing is that you can obviously grant shares or you can give stock in a company. That's one way of doing it. But you can also basically contract around any of these things. Now, most of the times they don't want the risk and they probably won't get the control if it's your company. So you really just have profit and you have upside in terms of a sale. And so you can contract these things, and there's lots of structure, so I'm not going to get into the legal around this. But asking somebody, what do you want? Sometimes it's just a very powerful way of beginning this. And my favorite question for these types of scenarios is asking, what would it take? So when you have this guy, it's like, man, it would be amazing. Like, how do I sell this guy? I just ask him, what would sell you? So I say, what would it take? Because I don't know. He'll tell me.
Mm.
And I love that frame because it assumes yes.
Mm.
It assumes you're going to come. So what would it take?
So many of the books that you write and so much of the content you make centers on this idea of sales.
Yeah.
And it is a sale, isn't it?
Totally.
And I always think about the Steve Jobs quote where he met with, was it John Scully, who was working at like Pepsi, and he said, do you want to continue selling sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come change the world?
Yeah.
How does that sort of emotional, psychological element of the sale factor into it? Persuading someone exceptional to come and join your mission?
I think it's the amygdala story that we started with the nasal strip thing, which now has actually reared its nose multiple times, poked its nose in a few times here. But I think that pitch that you're giving to a potential co-founder or potential early hire who's going to be a leader is the same, more or less, that you'd give to an investor. It's almost the same pitch, except instead of investing capital, they're investing time. They're investing their life. They're investing their expertise. But fundamentally, you're asking for investment.
Mm.
I'm just asking you.
Mm. There's also this weird question, which I've actually never asked anybody, but founders often struggle with, do I hire naivety? Because that's going to probably create new solutions to old problems, like the young scrappy kid that gets TikTok.
Yeah.
Or do I hire experience, which is going to be more expensive, more conventional and safe? And I see some companies lean too far either way.
Yeah. I have actually fairly strong opinions on this.
Oh, great.
So I actually think it's, and I was talking to the CEO of ButcherBox about this particular thing last week. I think it's a barbell strategy where you have people on either ends and very little in the middle.
Interesting.
So I love lots of young, hungry people who are here for growth and want to learn and are ready to work long hours and just go all in. And the people at the, call it the back half of their career that are here, that they've made enough money, they know they can get a job wherever they feel like it. You're not doing them a favor by giving them a job. And they're not a term I hate, which is careerists. They're not obsessed with their title. They're not obsessed with their career path, what their promotion plan is going to be. They basically have a litmus test, which is like, I have to make about this to get to come in and do this with you. But they actually just really love the work. And so these people are learning. So the young people are learning and overcompensating with tons of hours and reps. And these people are bringing their experience to the game and creating significantly more leverage with strategy. The people in the middle are the ones that tend to be the pain in the ass for everybody. And I don't think, and to be clear here, I don't think this is actually an age thing. I think it's a perspective thing. So it's just, are you here for growth or are you here to share what you know? And I think that it's the people in the middle that are like, well, I'm bringing something, but I need some. It's like this kind of tit for tat relationship that I would say the vast majority of people that don't work out are in that bucket.
And what role does naivety play in innovation here? Because the kids that don't know the rules
Yeah,
are more likely to stumble across nuances, right?
I think yes. You can fundamentally you can disrupt any industry if you don't know how it's supposed to go. And so, but that's I think that really teases out something we said at the very beginning, which is um, starting from first principles, which is what are the few things I know to be true, and then basically forgetting everything else. And when you build from those assumptions up, you end up building lots of different paths up the mountain that may or may not have been trodden before. I think one of the most corroborating things that can happen sometimes is that like you read-arrive a solution that already works, and you're like, okay, well now I know why this works, right? And I think that's actually then you have more confidence in the path, and you're like, okay, that's fine, but now I know why we're doing this, not just because other people did it, but because I understand why it works. And so I think it just comes down to what are the few truths that I know to be true and going all in on those things. Like, I know that if customers love my product, they are more likely to tell other people about it than if they hate it. That I feel very confident. So then we say, okay, what are the things that must occur in order to get someone to quote, love my product, AKA increase the likelihood that they tell their friends about it or post about us. And so now and you can break this, and again, this is where quality and quantity of metrics matter. So it's like, how much more nuance can I break this up into small pieces? So it's like, okay, at what time do we deliver these messages? Or around what experiences that have high likelihood of them posting? Can we decrease the friction around them sending friends? How can we make it both easy and how can we incentivize it? And so all of these components, whether it's a service business, a physical products business, a software business, it still works the same way. And for